episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
All right, welcome everybody again to another episode with another fascinating guest who is involved in creating a better tomorrow for all of us. And as a little background to today's show, the development of beneficial therapeutics for unmet medical needs often happens at very different paces around this world, depending on geographic territory and respective regulatory systems. On a past show, we talked about the very popular and effective and safe anti-diabetic drug metformin, which was discovered back in 1922, introduced in France in 1957, but didn't make it for some reason to the United States market till 1995, almost 40 years later. That's a long time to wait for anything. And the truth is that every year that goes by, we watch millions of patients around the globe become what we refer to as no option, with severe medical conditions where standard of care is exhausted and effective treatments are not available in their present sort of sphere of access. My Tomorrows is a fascinating company. It's a globally active healthcare company. It's based in the Netherlands, and it provides patients with unmet medical needs and their doctors information about treatment options worldwide and facilitates access to these medicines, some still in development, which may be achieved via clinical trials, expanded access, off-label use. And today, to further discuss My Tomorrows and everything that's going on there, we are joined by Ingmar de Hooijer, who is the Director of Public Policy and Reimbursement at My Tomorrows. Ingmar, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Yeah, great to be here, Ira, and thanks for having me. I know it's in the morning for you, it's afternoon here, so thanks for starting up early.
No problem at all. I've been looking forward to this. It's My Tomorrows has a rather fascinating background in the sense that founded by a gentleman, Dr. Ronald Bruce, was the CEO of a biotech company, Crucell, became part of Johnson & Johnson down the street here. And he had a very interesting, very frustrating event happen to him in the sense that here's a pharmaceutical executive, access to major medicines, and his father has lung cancer and he's unable to do anything about it. Take us a little bit on sort of this early story and how this background served as the genesis for everything that has been created today.
Sure. No, so Ronald Bruce was indeed the CEO of a company called Crucell, as you mentioned, a biotech company that focused mostly also on vaccines. It was then bought by J&J a while back for a couple of $2 billion. And I think out of Crucell now also the Ebola vaccines come, and I think also some of the COVID disease jabs. And Ronald actually then already had sold Crucell to J&J and then was in the circumstance that his father had lung cancer. And of course, he had a variety of people in his network from large pharmaceutical companies. And one of those CEOs actually told Ronald, listen, we have a drug in development that would actually potentially help your father. And so Ronald wanted to get access to this drug and help his father. And because of all the bureaucratic processes and rules and regulations, in the end, he did not get this drug to his father. The drug ended up to become an immune therapy and is now indeed first-line treatment for lung cancer that his father had. So Ronald actually promised his father, I'm going to fix this problem, because it makes no sense that if there's a drug in development, patients that need it, that should not be able to access that. And of course, there are laws and regulations in different countries around the world, but just making them work and really helping the patients in the end really was tricky. And so that's when My Tomorrows was founded. And the story actually even gets a little bit more emotional and pressing. And for myself also, I was really astonished because Ronald's wife was diagnosed with an untreatable form of cancer even last year. And thank God we were able to get her a drug through the early access program, which allowed her to live for at least a half a year longer, which then also made it so imminent clear what we're doing out there, right? So I mean, Ronald then had at least 6 to 8 months longer with his own wife to see how you figure that things out. So for us in the company, and we're with about 70, 80 people now, I think it's really clear why we're doing this. But that's just one part of the things that we're doing, because I think the potential of early access and harnessing that potential can lead to an array of other opportunities and possibilities that I'm sure we'll also talk about.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know there's, because of the position that MyTomorrow sits in, it has many networks, patients, doctors, pharmaceutical companies, researchers. Take us on a little journey, if you would, through how you go about deciding what therapies in what territories to focus on for these initiatives. Do you go to, do you look at sort of the 200 plus countries that are out there, examine the regulatory systems and say, hey, this makes sense, this could be quick? Or do you look at the products first? Talk us a little bit through what the strategy looks like on how you sort of do a deep dive on what to focus on in terms of the therapeutic indications, the areas of unmet medical need, and so forth.
Sure, great question. Hey, so in principle, MyTomorrows is a tech platform, right? So what in principle we do is we try to match patients that have no approved treatment options for them, and we match them with these drugs that are still in development that could actually save or improve their lives. Now, we're focusing mostly on the mature markets. And when you look at, for instance, Europe and the US and some other big markets, there are about 95 million patients who are currently lacking an approved treatment. And at the same time, we see that there are about 7,000 compounds currently in development, and they're being backed by about $180 billion of R&D money. Mm-hmm. And our aim is to match these two sides. Now, obviously, matching these two sides is a complicated process, and we facilitate these processes, which includes, as you mentioned, physicians, regulators, and even sometimes payers. And the way we do that is that we pretty much just look at through a variety of AI tools that we have, because if you look at our employee bases, we have people from, of course, a tech background, but also from an AI background, a medical background, you name it, regulatory background. And through our own tools, we can see which areas are the most or have the highest unmet need, and then which compounds are currently in development showing very good phase 2 data. And that's when we start reaching out to either the companies, because we get all these requests from patients asking us, is there anything out there for us? Mm-hmm. And if we get more requests from a certain specific patient group, then obviously we can go to the manufacturer or the developer and ask them, would you be willing to consider early access besides your clinical trials? And that's the way that we kind of work. And I mean, it's always a tailored program, and it depends. Is it a large manufacturer, a small manufacturer? Where is it based? We operate in 60 plus markets currently. And what we're really trying to do, because in essence, we're a tech company, that's the philosophy, right? And mm-hmm. So we want to scale this. We want to be able to treat and help as many patients, and also help as many manufacturers, physicians, governments, you name it, to get this ball game moving more in a harmonious way. And I think if you look at what's happening now with COVID, or at least the approach we're taking to tackle COVID with medical treatments, I think the collaborative efforts are amazing. And early access, I think, is becoming much more, the main stage, or how would you say that, just becoming more streamlined, because I mean, we all know that, your former president had remdesivir through early access. I know that other drugs, treatments are also gone through early access. So it's becoming more mainstream, and that's really great also for us, of course.
Absolutely. Talk a little bit about the experience that either I, God forbid, as a patient or my clinician, what do we expect when we go to the MyTomorrow's website? Tell us a little about the experience, just for others that obviously we want to everyone looking at the site after the show, but walk us through a little of the experience that exists today on this technology platform.
Okay, sure. So in principle, we target three main audiences through our website. So we have the patients, the physicians, and the manufacturers themselves. Now, if you are a patient, you go to the website, and although we are a tech company and we try to automate everything as good as possible, obviously you need human interface. So we have patient navigators in our employee base, and once you are a patient, you filled in your form, what you're looking for, you get in contact with a patient navigator. And then once we understand your situation a little bit better, we can make for you a personalized treatment search report, which pretty much says, with your condition, there are currently these amount of trials that are open, these amount of early access programs that are available, and can we help you further? Then it depends what the patient wants, right? So the patient usually then discusses it with its physician, and then if the physician wants to access us, we help them out, and then we kind of facilitate the process. Obviously, physicians also come to our website to see, I have a patient with an unmet medical need, how can we help them? And we actually go through the same process, and we get a tailored search report, and we then just make things happen. And manufacturers, I mean, that's probably the least relevant now maybe, but for them, obviously, we can show them exactly what we do, how we find patients, how we select patients, how we go reach out to physicians, how we do actually our outreach strategies, how we facilitate also the logistics, and also the quality requirements. I mean, it's a complicated field, as you understand. Sure. And we have all those services in-house and have automated them as much as possible. Now, this stuff, we're obviously trying to improve that continuously. And that's why we have a lot of smart people around in our company that really focus on making the journey for a physician and a patient as nice and smooth as possible, right? So we're continuously improving these algorithms to automatically match patients with drugs, automate these procedures to regulatory approval, quality assurance, all that kind of stuff. And what we're now doing even more, and that's where our focus, I think, is for the next 12 months, is that we're developing algorithms that the patient data that we get from patients before we can actually really search for them what they exactly need, right? Because a lot of treatments these days are specifically related to genetic profiling, etc. We're now also developing those kind of algorithms that would process the patient data files so that they can be immediately be deployed in hospitals, so that we don't have that delay. That's pretty much how it works. And for manufacturers, what we've noticed, but also for regulators and investors, what's been very interesting, and that's, I think, one of our unique selling points, if you would want to call it that way, is that we really focus on this real world data collection of the patients that come into an early access program. There are a variety of reasons, I think, why real-world data is moving up the ladder and becoming more important next to the gold standard of RCTs. And, we are full-fledged focused on that whole real-world data study design, the setup, the managing of that data, the capturing of the data, and even analyzing that data. And we have some very smart people around that are helping manufacturers to make sure that physicians have it very easy to track the data and fill that in digitally, and that we can share that with physicians or regulators in the end so that their files can be submitted, and that, and we might talk about that later, that might, influence the current drug development system in a positive way, because we can get those costs down and earlier time to market, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a little bit how it works.
And that's that topic of reducing costs, obviously, that theme of whether it's $2 billion or $3 billion or $5 billion or wherever the cost of drug development is going. And a couple of weeks ago we talked with Free to Choose Medicine and about sort of the early access and what that means if we could access these drugs at phase 2 and instead of phase 3 and all that. I've seen you talk a little bit lately in interviews on the topic of funding and pricing, specifically as it pertains to some of this new stuff that's coming. And you were in one of the presentations, you pointed out, and I'm thinking about it, if Mike Tomorrows finds out, wow, yeah, I found an awesome drug, but it's $5 million. Help us with that one. How can my tomorrows in this model not just reduce the cost of drug development, but maybe impact the way we think of of some of these smart drugs, whatever class you want to put them in, make a little more pricing sense behind those two.
Yeah, that's a great question, and obviously it's a complicated question.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people are, a lot of smart people are thinking about how to solve this specific topic. And I just wrote a paper with our founder Ronald Bruss, where we kind of elaborate on how you could use early access and specific funding models to drive down costs, which we believe then will lead to more competition, which will lead then in the end to better pricing, as you will. And it's clear, and it's good maybe to make a difference between the US and Europe on this, because there are because of the health systems and how that works. Now, in principle, how we look at this is, on average, it takes anywhere between 8 and 10 years from clinical testing to approval. And even with the best intention of all the regulators, and the FDA, I think, is leading the pack also when it comes to early access, really amazing. And maybe we'll touch on that later, how they're coping with the right to try and how that's different in Europe. But I mean, the FDA is doing great work, even also with their fast track approval routes. But on average, you don't really see, the timelines going down significantly. As you mentioned, the drug pricing, of an R&D trajectory is anywhere between 300 million and 2.8 billion. I think one of the research pieces I like the most, the average is about 1.3 billion, very solid piece. I think so. I always say about $1.5 billion USD for one asset compound to be developed, right? Now, there are two interesting figures that we looked at with some very bright consultants, is that when you look at these numbers, these costs, you see that 50% of all the costs are incurred in the last phase. So that's after phase 2. So let's say, the half of that 1.3 billion is really only in phase 3 and onward. And when you look a little bit deeper, you also see that 50% of the total R&D cost is cost of capital. So that's nothing else than cost of capital. Now, every economist, or I think every little bit logical speaking person would understand that if 50% is cost of capital, you would want to reduce that as fast as possible. And you do that by, if you can reduce the time to market and achieve earlier income generation, right? Then these costs go down significantly. Now, in Europe, you can even add on top of these 8 to 10 years development, you can add sometimes 3 years of no access, because that's just the discussion that governments and payers have with the manufacturer before they reimburse it or fund it. So then we have another 3 years that there's no access for patients. Now, in the US, this is a little bit better, but I think also in the US, you see continuously, or more and more payers and insurers, really thinking about, why are we paying this price? You see ICER becoming more and more important, I think, in the US, which is similar to the HTA agencies in Europe. But so these 3 years after approval, we believe that the reason why this is happening is because these payers and societies find it difficult to grasp the value of the drug because of the data. Again, it's smaller patient groups with limited data sets, and then why should we pay so much? And there's a lot of uncertainty. And we believe that the data that you can actually extract from early access programs, if you do that in a smart way, if it's enough data, you could actually get from this real world data, make it into real world evidence, and that could support your submission either to the regulator, be it the FDA or the EMA, but even more important, maybe, especially in Europe, is to the insurer and the HTA bodies. So you would give them more data in advance, because you do this in simultaneous with your, your clinical trials. That means you could get faster reimbursement, faster time to market, reduce costs. And I mean, that's a very interesting proposition. And we see that especially the smaller biotechs are very interested in this, because it would open up a new pathway for them to commercialization, right? And that's very interesting. So It's even interesting in the US because you get more data, and then you're at some point, I imagine you want to go to Europe, and if you can already reduce your timelines there and get revenue, it makes a lot of sense. And you're helping all these patients and physicians and others while doing this. So to us, it's like a win-win of all the parties to make this happen. But yeah, and that's my role in the company to facilitate these discussions, because everybody has their own opinion and angle, and there are high stakes involved. And just making it work for everybody, that's the trick. And I mean, that's what we're doing as we speak.
And what, you made me think one other thing. It was obviously you have another very important task, and you brought it up earlier when you mentioned COVID. Obviously, we've moved from this state of sort of learning about the virus. Now we develop vaccines, and now there's this big issue of logistics and supply chain, and how you get this vaccine all over the world. Somewhat of a similar situation for you guys on a smaller level, in the sense that after you deal with regulators and manufacturers and patients and physicians, you still got to get that drug from Turkey to Brazil, or in the right fashion, in the right supply chain and so forth. Just tell us a little about your experiences in sort of this area, if you would, and how you navigate, the customs in a certain country when you're bringing in something. What is this? Describing it and so forth. Any interesting stories on sort of the logistics front?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always fascinated by the work that there are three teams in principle that we see within My Tomorrows that focus on this, right? We got the quality folks that have to make sure that all the quality things are all taken care of. Yep. We got the regulatory folks that actually have to get the approval from the authorities to make it happen. And we got the tech ops folks, as we call them, and they have to manage this whole logistical supply chain. And yeah, I mean, with COVID, we've seen some bizarre challenges in terms of getting it to the patient, because there were lockdowns and things were. But actually, in all honesty, all our providers that we work with, all those logistical providers, they're also looking for solutions. And we've so far, and knock on wood, we've always been able to get this drug in a reasonable time to the patient in need. And obviously, the patients that we work with have an unmet need and are really seriously ill. So time is of the essence. And so just making sure that regulatory is as close as possible to quality and to tech ops, that's like the key here, so we can move as fast forward as possible. And in the end, so far, so good. We've always been able to make this happen. I'm just proud of the team to say that, right? So for no issues as yet.
Great, outstanding. Yeah, I just thought I'd bring that up because it's something that, a lot of us in different aspects, we don't really have to deal with that, but it's something that you also, have to take care of in this unique model. Ingmar, any, obviously nothing confidential, but can you take us out a few years now? New things that are coming, the new services as part of the program in general. Anything you want to talk about that you're allowed to talk about that tells about sort of the next few years of My Tomorrows? That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So, I think we mentioned it already before. There are three clear trends that are working in our favor. And I think one of them is just the awareness and action among patients that they really want this stuff. I mean, you look at the US, you see the Right to Try movement, and you also see crowdfunding campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. Yep. You also see that in Europe, and with the last, for instance, the gene therapy for SMA that was first approved in the US, and then in Europe, it was a big problems all over the globe. And we also see that regulators and physicians are more and more inclined to work with early access and expedite that actually. And to this, really compliments to the FDA, right? Because what they're doing in this field, I find really amazing. And the FDA, how they've actually been able to, in some way moderate this right to try movement and just improve their own early access pathway. I think, the right to try is, in that sense, practically not so relevant, I think, for patients because of the fast movement of the FDA itself. So those regulators are continuously focusing also on real-world data collection. I think the FDA even now has some guidance document where they say, if you want to do a regulatory submission, keep the real-world data in this kind of way. So that's just all moving in the right direction for us. The two things, and one of them is that we're very much in charge of. That's kind of the opportunities that technology give, machine learning, AI, automation, all that stuff. Now, that's where we're going to focus on heavily in the coming years, right? I mean, we've been around now for a couple of years. We've had quite some funding already from investors, and I think probably this year we're going to go out and do another round, and that's all going to go into the tech platform, just being able to scale this even better and even more. And that would be on, of course, the whole real world data side of things, but also algorithms and ways that physicians can even easier go to our platform and get the stuff that they need. And I mean, you mentioned that, you know, getting a drug to a different country in a different region, it is really, really tricky, right? If we have to go suddenly to India, and then it's Turkey, and then it's somewhere, you know, in Venezuela, well, not Venezuela per se, but in Mexico. Yeah, it's really, really complicated to just be on track of all these regulations and just automating that in our own internal house and making sure that we have that as fast as possible is, of course, we're doing that, but I think we can do that even better. And that's what we're going to focus on more and more in the future. And also the data that we're now tracking and the way that we have contact with physicians and patients, we're also seeing that we can leverage this for other services through the tech platform, right? We can now also screen patients maybe for clinical trials instead of early access programs. So we can also offer these pharmaceutical companies a lot more, well, let's say, products in a sense, how they can improve their own drug development pathway. So that's what we're really going to focus on. And then the last part, this whole drug development model as such, I mean, that's where we're going to continuously focus on and discuss with these different groups, be it regulators, payers, physicians, and patients. And this will be, I think, for a large part in Europe, because there we have the opportunity to charge for early access programs, right? I mean, in the US, that's a little bit of a hurdle in that sense, is that the FDA only allows manufacturers to recoup their manufacturing costs and monitoring for early access, which means you would have to provide, you know, all those costs in a transparent way. And I think from a business sense, that's obviously not a very nice thing to do because of competitive disadvantages you would have as a manufacturer. But in Europe, the payers are actually allowed to pay for early access programs. You see that happening through a system in France already. And other countries are really now very much focused on getting new innovative funding models on the scene. I mean, it's unbelievable if you just listen to the WHO, and then specifically the European region of the WHO. If you hear them speaking, they are just literally saying there is an issue now in Europe that we cannot afford all these new innovations coming to market. We can't guarantee, you know, sustainable access. You see the European Commission with their pharmaceutical strategy saying, you know, we're going to focus on affordability. And that's when we say, if you really want to make drugs, you know, more affordable, then you got to work together and change this ecosystem, right? And we all know that the ecosystem is smaller companies are pretty much the originators, developers, and then it goes to the larger companies, and then it kind of happens. And this is just a limited, it's not a highly optimized system with a lot of people and things in the middle. And so what we're trying to do by just proposing specific pilots, you know, maybe a smaller or medium-sized manufacturer of a gene therapy could then, while it's in phase 3, already provide this through an early access program that is paid for, that is, you know, has pay performance elements where you just discuss with each other, you know, what are we going to pay now? What are we going to do with the data that comes out of it? Are we going to pay more or less than? What are we going to do when it becomes approved? What's going to happen with the price? And all those kind of discussions are very complicated. But I think once we get through them, you're just going to see a lot of things changing. And we've seen that in France, you know, and I'm expecting some other markets to follow. You know, once a market says, you know, I'm willing to pay, let's say, you know, $800,000 for a gene therapy while it's in phase 3 versus $2.5 million when it's approved. I mean, you know, then at some point it's going to make sense, especially if the patients say, I want to take this risk. If the physicians agree that the risk is okay, the regulators say, let's do this, then it's really all about just financial modeling and being smart about this. And there are a lot of coalitions and initiatives going on in Europe to really make this happen. So I think that's kind of the third lever that we're focusing on. That's at least that's most what I'm focusing on, of course. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it, huh?
No, it's a wonderful story. I mean, you have a lot of great things planned, and it's I say I've followed the story for many years now as My Tomorrows grew, and it's just so nice to see it at this level and doing all the things that it's doing and executing on this plan. So really, I take my hat off to you guys for making this all happen. And for everybody that's going to be watching this particular episode on the YouTube channel or listening on the podcast networks, you've been listening to Ingmar de Hooijer, Director of Public Policy and Reimbursement at My Tomorrows, doing amazing things to access medicines for people with unmet medical need and their clinicians around the world, improving access, including time, reducing costs. A really amazing business model, and really wishing you the best with it. I want to thank you, Ingmar, for taking the time to come on the show today and tell the story. And thank you for doing it. And as we say on the show, thank you for helping to create a better tomorrow. Thank you for creating a better My Tomorrow for everybody. It was a really great time seeing you.
Great, and just and thank you very much, Ira. And just for the audience to just get a bit of a grasp, how many people we actually work with, and how many compounds you already have on the platform. Just be aware that we're currently working with literally dozens of pharmaceutical companies who are offering their treatments on our platforms. Mostly we see it's within oncology, hematology, and rare diseases. But literally we're helping thousands of patients each year with these treatment search reports, and we're treating hundreds of them with really early access products and treatments. And this treatment is free of charge for patients and physicians, right? We get paid by pharma. So there is no cost involved for patients or physicians, which is important to note. And that's obviously that, other plans are now with payers. We're thinking about that in Europe, how to change that. And it's pretty much, it's worldwide. So yeah, I can only say we're trying to make this dream even become more of a reality, where we really can guarantee earlier access to all the possible treatments that are around. And yeah, I mean, everybody's excited and going up for it. So thanks again for having me on the show. And if you have any questions, or if anybody has any questions, you're obviously very, very delighted to answer them all.
Absolutely. And we'll put links to the site, of course, and in the bio and throughout the blog. So really exciting stuff. Good seeing you.
Thanks a lot, Ira.